Hello, everyone. I'm going to give my presentation here that I gave at Data Readiness for AI workshop at the International Conference on Parallel Programming in San Diego on September 8th. This is work I did with my collaborators from the National Center for Computational Sciences. So just to give some context, I work at the Oak Ridge Leadership Computing Facility, and since 2004, the OLCF has delivered a string of world-leading supercomputers from Jaguar to Titan to Summit, and now Frontier, the first exascale system. Each generation has enabled new science, and our mission has always been to accelerate discovery by providing the most powerful computational resources to the research community. In recent years, AI has become a major consumer of leadership computing time. We've seen AI and machine learning usage expand rapidly across projects. These aren't commercial workloads, they're scientific applications, such as training models for climate prediction, fusion control, bioinformatics, materials discovery, among others. And so this shift or emphasis in AI integration raises a key question: is our data really ready for AI at this scale? Since that study, we've performed a survey of all the different ways that AI is being used on HPC, and we've come up with 6 typical execution motifs, which are shown in this table. If you're interested, you can see our paper. It's currently on archive awaiting publication on HPC AI workflows. It's important to recognize that scientific AI is fundamentally different from commercial AI, which is why we need to have sort of a special data readiness framework for scientific AI. In commercial AI, data sets often come from user-generated sources. Think of images, text, or audio at web scale. They're abundant, well-labeled, and relatively easy to put into a training pipeline. In contrast, scientific data sets come from high-fidelity simulations or costly experiments. Labels are often limited, inconsistent, or even missing entirely. Preparing these data sets requires heavy preprocessing to ensure uniformity, compliance, and reproducibility. Accuracy is another critical dimension. Scientific applications demand 32 or even 64-bit precision to preserve numerical stability and physical realism. And unlike commercial AI, scientific models must respect fundamental physical laws such as conservation or boundary conditions, or else the predictions are meaningless. Finally, there's the challenge of scale and infrastructure. Data must be prepared at petascale and exascale volumes in secure and auditable ways, which requires high throughput parallel file and pipelines that integrate seamlessly with GPU accelerated training at leadership computing facility. So again, I mentioned that the takeaway here is that scientific AI requires specialized data readiness frameworks. This work was motivated by 4 key challenges. First is that AI foundation models depend on data readiness. Without well-prepared, standardized data, even the most powerful models won't be able to deliver useful results. And I should also mention on this one that, if you talk with data scientists, people often say, and is my own experience as well, that people spend roughly the majority of the projects trying to get the data and get it in a form that it can be trained. I would say on the order of like 80% of the time on most projects is spent in this area of data readiness. 2, scientific data sets are expensive to generate. They're often sparse and high dimensional, which makes pre-processing critical to make them usable. Third motivation is that typically each domain reinvents its own pre-processing or has very bespoke pre-processing. So the lack of common pipelines hinders reuse, scalability, and cross-domain learning. And lastly, to train large scientific foundation models on leadership computing systems, we need scalable, standardized AI-ready data pipelines integrated into HPC workflows. So our goal is to move beyond generic AI pipelines and build specialized readiness frameworks tailored to science. That means defining a taxonomy for readiness, identifying cross-domain patterns, developing a maturity matrix to measure progress, and providing guidance for facilities, so we can prepare data in a reproducible, scalable way. So drawing on domain workflow and expert interviews, we analyzed 4 different scientific domains to identify canonical preprocessing patterns and propose a conceptual maturity matrix to classify data sets based on their proximity to being ready to train. This slide shows the general pipeline most of us know for transforming data to AI ready. It begins with raw data collection and then goes through cleaning, preprocessing, optional augmentation. So if you have low data in certain classes or areas, you may generate more data by doing things like rotating images, adding noise, generating synthetic data, data annotation and labeling, data formatting, structuring, partitioning, and exporting, and then some level of quality assurance. And this is an iterative process. So from these different stages, basically what we initially did was came up with a sort of a 5-level AI ready categorization. So the 5 levels are raw data, cleaned, labeled, featureized, and AI ready. When we took these readiness levels and tried to apply them to different scientific workflows, basically we found that they were sort of lacking in the ability to describe the actual readiness. So so we started thinking from this time about a more multi-dimensional approach. And as I'll show you later, these 5 stages form the rows of our 2D maturity matrix. So we selected 4 domains to investigate AI readiness for scientific applications. These domains were selected because they represent strategic priorities within DOE leadership computing facilities. 2, they cover diverse data modalities and preprocessing requirements. And 3, they uniquely demonstrate AI readiness challenges and opportunities. So now we're going to go through each of these 4 in a little bit more detail. So climate data sets include CMIP-6 simulations, MODIS satellite imagery, ground radar, and ERA5 reanalysis data sets. These sources are massive and heterogeneous, requiring careful alignment. AI for climate integrates simulations and reanalysis data. Reanalysis data are kind of like data that's collected, different types of data that's collected in different modalities, and then it's sort of fused together to provide an overall data set that can be used together with the simulations. So it may be like satellite observations or one of those. To improve Earth system predictability, models learn from heterogeneous multivariable data sets at global scale. So in this case, we looked at 2 projects. We analyzed 2 projects. One is called Orbit, which is a foundation model developed at Oak Ridge. OR stands for Oak Ridge. It's a foundation model trained on CMIP-6 and ERA5 for Earth system predictability, and also Climax, which is a general purpose foundation model for climate task trained on CMIP-6 and ERA5 data sets. I think Microsoft was the one that was leading Climax. These two projects actually use the same pre-processing workflow. So uh, the main difference is this is a more Climax is a more general purpose model, whereas Orbit's more so Climate can do not only forecasting but can also do like event prediction, event detection, things like that. Whereas Orbit is primarily a forecasting model and focused on high accuracy forecasting. So the readiness challenges, the main readiness challenges for Climate were our spatial and temporal misalignment. So you have different simulations that have uh, different resolutions of spatial and temporal grids. Um, and so you have to basically align all these, which is where the regridding comes in. And you also have redundant fields and non-standard formats. So Climate's typically using files like GRIB and NetCDF. And then you need high throughput is required for terabyte scale training. So the climate readiness pattern is uniform regridding across time steps and models per variable normalization and binary sharding. So we simplify this as download, regrid, normalized shard. For fusion, and fusion data comes from both large-scale simulations such as XGC-1 and experimental reactors like D3D. These data sets are heterogeneous, high rate, and often fragmented, which makes them challenging to prepare for AI. So a key AI use case is coupling offline training with high fidelity simulations, coupling offline training on high fidelity simulations with online inference using experimental diagnostics to support things like disruption prediction and plasma control. So disruption prediction is basically predicting when the plasma is going to collapse, which could cause a lot of damage to the reactor. So for this kind of workflow, we were looking at like ML pipelines related to D3D prediction, disruption prediction, and plasma control, and also XGC-1, which is a leadership scale gyrokinetic simulations with ML surrogates for turbulence modeling. XGC-1 simulates turbulence transport in the edge region of a tokamak plasma where the magnetic field lines intersect material walls. That's edge turbulence strongly influences the plasma confinement stability and ultimately the fusion performance. The readiness challenges for fusion are sparse and noisy signals. So you actually have experimental data that you're having to analyze and feed in, and limited labels and inconsistent provenance, as well as physics-informed features are often required. So for fusion readiness patterns, we have time window slicing and alignment, physics-derived feature computation, shot level normalization and aggregation, sharded output in TF record or HDF5. And so we simplify this pre-processing pattern to extract, align, normalize, shard. For biohealth, workflows span molecular modeling, clinical imaging, and genomic sequencing. Data often contain protected health or personally identifiable information, which means they must comply with strict standards like HIPAA and GA4GH. AI and biohealth integrates sequence encoding, structural modeling, and multimodal fusion. So models like AlphaFold demonstrate how pre-processing enables breakthroughs in protein structure predictions. So in this case, we looked at three different examples. One is AlphaFold. I think this is the most famous example in scientific AI. It predicts 3D protein structures from amino acid sequences. Informer predicts gene sequence or gene expression from sequence data. And Twofold was developed at ORNL and it integrates AlphaFold, the protein structure predictions from AlphaFold, and the gene expression modeling from Informer in a unified framework. And the idea there is to be able to uh, use AI to speed up drug discovery by predicting how strongly molecules bind to targets and how they attach in 3D. So the readiness challenges here include privacy and security requirements, inconsistencies across multimodal data sources, and many biomedical data sets suffer from sparse or incomplete labels. When we analyze these workflows, we observed a consistent preprocessing pattern. Data must be encoded, anonymized, fused across modalities. The multimodal fusion, when I talk about that, is that you have different types of data like molecular models, clinical imaging, and genomic sequencing, and you have to fuse these together by creating embeddings and things like that. And then sharded storage for secure multi-GPU training. So if we simplify this workflow pattern, we get encode, anonymize, fuse, and shard. Lastly, let's look at material science. These data sets typically come from large density functional theory simulations or molecular libraries. They can be extremely large, and they're especially well suited to representation with graph neural networks. For the AI use case, large-scale DFT data sets are preprocessed into graph encodings to train models to predict material properties from atomic structures. One such example we analyzed was Hydra GNN, which is a distributed PyTorch framework developed at ORNL for graph neural networks. Hydra GNN enables us to predict energetic and mechanical properties of materials directly from atomic structures, which can scale across leadership computing systems. And the challenges here are class imbalance across material classes. So certain classes have more samples than other classes, fidelity mismatches between simulation and experiment, and graph complexity and standardization issues. So from examining these workflows, we see a consistent pattern, materials readiness pattern. First to parsing simulation outputs, normalizing the atomic and structural descriptors, encoding them as graphs, and sharding into binary formats like ADIOS and MPZ for scalable training. And so the simplified preprocessing pattern here is parse, normalize, encode, and shard. And so when you put all these, so we summarize the 4 preprocessing patterns here. You'll so what we wanted to do is take these, and then we wanted to abstract these into a more generic cross-domain preprocessing pattern. And so this is our cross-domain preprocessing pattern. Which involves ingest, preprocess, transform, structure, and shard. Of course, the first step is downloading, which I didn't include here, but these are 5 generic or abstracted or high-level steps, and then this abstracted pattern becomes the columns of our 2D maturity matrix. And so if we take these 5 steps, 5 stages of canonical preprocessing pattern, and we can sort of look now each one what it involves. So you can have ingest, but ingest can have different modes like acquisition, like collecting data from simulations, experiments, or public, or streaming, or format harmonization, capturing data from multiple formats. Preprocess has operations such as regridding, alignment, anonymization. Transform has operations such as engineer features, encode, normalize. Structure has operations like tensorize, sequence or hierarchical structuring or graph structuring, preparing for GNNs. And finally, sharding has operations such as partitioning, converting to binary formats, and enabling the scalable training. And so this gives us a cross-domain framework while leaving room for domain-specific steps. And this sort of becomes the beginning of where we can start thinking about developing a framework that works across multiple scientific domains, a framework for data readiness. And so now we've, as I kept alluding to, that we have this 2D conceptual maturity matrix for data readiness, and now the rows of this matrix become our AI readiness indicators from 1 to 5. So as you go down the rows, this represents increasing maturity, and the data processing stages are the different pre-processing stages. And so the idea here is if you look at ingest, as you go down the maturity, each of these stages is sort of becoming more mature. So you start out with initial raw acquisition, and then you go through stages of validating ingestion into standardized formats, enhancing metadata enrichments, optimizing high throughput ingestion, and then you end up with fully AI ready for ingestion pipelines, fully automated and performance optimized. And you have the similar for the other stages as well. So this gives you a better idea of the entire process of going from initial raw acquisition to fully AI ready for scientific AI data sets. Despite progress in developing AI-ready workflows across domains, several challenges persist, limiting the reproducibility, scalability, and generalizability of scientific foundation models. These involve one is data scarcity and balance. So many data sets remain sparse or biased. Pipeline scalability. Today's pipelines are bespoke and brittle. Provenance and reproducibility. We need better tracking from raw data to train model. Fragmentation across domains, so communities use inconsistent formats and metadata. And finally, privacy and security compliance. So sensitive data adds layers of complexity. And so these are the things we have to consider when developing a framework, how to address these challenges. So let me wrap up with some key takeaways from our work and some future directions. First, data readiness is multidimensional. It's not a simple binary state of ready or not ready. Instead, it spans a spectrum defined by domain-specific pre-processing stages and readiness levels. Second, we see recurring pre-processing patterns across domains. By capturing these patterns in a two-dimensional maturity matrix, data readiness levels on one axis and pre-processing stages on the other, we can benchmark, compare, and generalize approaches across science. Three, readiness gaps persist. So sparse or noisy labels, inconsistent formats, and privacy or governance constraints continue to block progress, especially in high-value domains like health. And finally, we argue for moving towards a scientific AI readiness framework. That framework would include reusable templates, scalable pipelines, provenance capture, and security enclaves, concrete tools that will accelerate scientific foundation model development at leadership facilities. And I add this one, in this work, our work was limited to sort of technical data readiness, but there are other important topics that go beyond this work that include things like ensuring fair principles, ethics, bias, and governance. And I'd like to thank my collaborators and, and colleagues across AI, climate fusion, biohealth, and materials for their contributions. We interviewed a number of these folks who are domain experts in different areas to come up with a lot of the content for this paper and presentation. And I'd also want to acknowledge the OLCF and DOE Office of Science for supporting this work. Thank you.